Carson, as a new company, Decapod Devices, it's nice to include a bit of your story, as you've been a member of the DivKid Discord community for a long time now as well. Appreciate your support over the years. So how did you get into this? Obviously into modular. I know you're into the Electron boxes. What led you into Eurorack?
So yeah, I got into Eurorack. I kind of started out interested in synthesizers in Eurorack probably around 2016 or something like that. I was watching Look Mom No Computer videos on YouTube. And his ability to combine like the sort of limitless nature of Eurorack or of modular synthesizers with like really nice performances. That was really inspiring to me. And I started learning about how modular worked, and it just sort of sent my brain spinning. And after that, I couldn't stop myself from buying some modules.
Yeah, Sam's great for that. Making it all look the same as well. It's such a performative thing. It looks like an instrument. I love that it's metric 5U and it's not 5U.
Yeah, his way of like putting on a show is incredible. It's something I've never been able to achieve, but it's an aspiration for sure.
Yeah, he's a real artist at heart. It's great. So jumping forward then, what was that time period between getting into some modules, buying your first modules, and then wanting to build? Have you any kind of electronics background that pushed things that way, or?
Just a little bit. Like in high school, I messed with Arduino some, just kind of like learning how to fade LEDs, basically. And I kind of got a point with that where it's like, okay, I know how to turn LEDs on and off and fade them, but I didn't really have any good ideas for projects to use it for besides that. And then I kind of lost interest in electronic stuff for many years. And then getting into modular, I think it's natural. You have a set of modules and you want more functions, but it's expensive. And most things aren't necessarily exactly what you want. So you start thinking of like, oh, if only I had something that did this, this, and this. And so I started thinking about the Arduino. And I remember building a rotating clock divider and seeing on the board that it's basically just an Arduino, with extra circuitry, obviously. And looking into like, how hard it would be, or how hard would it be to actually like make a module of my own with some of these ideas that I have that I don't see in any other modules. And it turns out it's a lot harder than I thought at the time, but luckily I didn't know that at the time, so I kept at it.
Yeah. You don't know until you know, kind of thing, until you're in it.
Yeah, exactly.
You're so exposed to the electronics as well. I think if there's any inclination in that, it's just a constant visual reminder. I mean, not once they're in the case, but it is as you're doing it.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah, like you can just pull it, and noise engineering is some of my favorite. You can just look at the module and be like, okay, like try to figure out what each thing is doing,
So jumping forward to, obviously people know this is now Neptune, as it's in the Neptune video, but how did you get to know Thea? How did that relationship come about?
So probably back in, I guess it would have been 2020, around the time of Castor and Pollux 1 launched, I saw Red Means Recordings video on it, and the visuals of it were really inspiring to me, and I had started getting interested in like the PCB panel artwork stuff from Make Noise and Instro, and the possibilities there for making unique artwork. And that, it being a small new company, and it just seemed somewhat attainable, I guess. And it just seemed like a really nice product. And so I emailed Thea, and because it's open source as well, I just really like that ethos. So I emailed Thea at one point back then, sort of just asking for advice, how to get into making Eurorack modules. And that I wanted to, at that point I kind of wanted to start my own company. And I eventually joined the Winterbloom Discord and just kind of got to know her over the course of a year, a few years there. And in the meantime, working on building my own modules, trying to start a company doing that. And I kind of came to the conclusion eventually, once, like basically I had some prototypes that were essentially fully functional to my specifications, but I couldn't decide on the artwork for the front panel and like the branding of my company and just basically all the like business side of it, like making a website and all that stuff. And I had moved back to Atlanta, which is where Winterbloom is based, and where I'm originally from Athens, Georgia, which is just right outside of Atlanta. And so I moved back here, and I was kind of like, do I really want to go through all of this work to start a company when I already know and really like Thea? And so I kind of got together with her, and I was like, hey, do you want to work together on this project? And that's it's gone from there.
It wasn't the filter first though, right? If I remember our conversation going back some time, an oscillator was one of the first things, and something else prior to that as well.
Yeah, so the very first thing was a digital module it started out with a Teensy 4.0, and then I went to a STM32, and it was a thing that generated like envelopes and LFOs and things like that. And that eventually, through my indecision and the chip shortage, and also I don't love programming, that kind of killed that idea. But I started getting into analog electronics, semi because of the chip shortage, because all those chips were still available, at least the simple ones.
Yeah.
And so I started making an oscillator and a filter sort of in parallel, with sort of the idea of just like building the core fundamentals of a synthesizer, right?
Yeah.
And so the filter ended up becoming Neptune, and the oscillator I still have. You could probably see in my rack behind. I still use those oscillators; they're good, but I'm not sure if I'm going to actually like try and turn them into a real product. They're kind of expensive and use a bunch of weird parts, and they're not that much different than existing oscillators. So,
getting into the features, obviously a salt control. I think that's a first. I don't know of any module with a. I mean, there might be. I'm not going to be 100% on that, but I don't know of a module with a salt control. That specific patch, though, as I say, you've been in the DivKid Discord for some time now, and you've recommended that as a patch that people make, or a simplified version of where this came from. So what actually is the salt feature?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a creative naming, but it's one of my favorite tricks that you can pretty much use with any filter, with a little bit of interpretation and tuning to it. But originally, my very first filter in Eurorack was the Jove, and I always loved the interface for it. The spacing of the knobs was always great. Neptune was somewhat inspired by that. The naming, similarly. And a trick I always used with that, I think I might have saw it on one of your videos, I can't quite remember where it came from, was taking the output of the filter and feeding it back into one of the CV inputs to modulate the cutoff frequency. And so that makes it, with the resonance low, it kind of just adds a little bit of like a grit and an edge that I felt was missing in the Jove. The Jove is a very clean filter, and I kind of wanted a little bit of like, edginess to it. And that gave me that, which was nice. But then when you turn the resonance up and, put the cutoff in certain areas, it can get really wild and chaotic. And I like that aspect too. And there's a good bit of controllability there as well. And so I thought about taking that basic idea of taking the output and feeding it back to the input, and was thinking about what you could do to sort of modify that to make it more interesting. And the thing I thought of was to send it through a full wave rectifier. So whenever the wave goes positive, it goes up, and then when it would go negative, it would also go up, like an absolute value. And so that's what ended up becoming the salt control, is taking the output and feeding it through a full wave rectifier and then going to the input. And there's a little bit of filtering and like stuff in there to keep it from swinging too wildly, because a couple of my very first prototypes, the one you have, I think sometimes it'll kind of blow your head off with volume. So there's some modifications there, but that's the basic idea, and you can do it with most filters. It's a really nice patch.
It's nice that it's back to the cutoff, I think, because feedback, as in audio out to audio in, is nice, and it's kind of an alternate resonance path. It could be like a saturation, but actually FMing, and then it's still feedback, because the way that then FMs the filter is then affecting the out. But through the rectifier, it's interesting. I keep saying in the video, I'm probably going to have to cut it out, because I say it like every other line. I pretty much say salt to taste. Like, and I'm annoyed at myself, not at the name salt, but I realise I need to stop saying salt to taste. But it's kind of true. I worked in a kitchen. I guess there's some reference to that. Just a little bit of salt. Sometimes you want a lot, sometimes a little. Some things none at all.
I actually have to give credit to a member of the Winterbloom community for coming up with that name. In my original prototypes, it was called Instability. And when we were working on the panel, it's like, that's kind of long for a Eurorack panel. Yeah. So we had to come up with something a little shorter, and we were asking for suggestions, and somebody came up with Salt.
Yeah, Salt, Neptune, God of Water and Sea, all that kind of thing. It works. I'm sure I've said some really corny nautical puns as well. I need to, we'll see how many of those make the actual video and how many are in the edit. I'll maybe tally them up.